So in order to target the upper back, meaning the traps, the rhomboids, the teres major, and the rear delts, versus the lats and all different portions of the lats, we really just need to understand the functional anatomy of these things and how they function differently. Now, first things first, and a point that I think that's often lost in this conversation is there's no such thing as isolation when it comes to rows, okay? So you could be as specific and as biased toward, you know, a more upper back type motion or a more lat type motion, but there's always going to be some sort of crossover and some sort of overlapping in terms of the stimulus. So just to get that out of the way first, a little bit about the anatomy and understanding the differences here between targeting these things. The upper back sitting more obviously on the upper portion of the spine. All of the fibers of the upper back are going to run more in this direction in terms of the plane of motion that they act on, which really means that they're going to function a little bit better with a wider arm path, whether it's more of a horizontal row, a low to high row, or a pull down type motion. The more that the arm moves away from the rib cage, the more that all of this stuff is going to be targeted. Now the lats are sort of opposite in the sense that they still do pull the arm down and back to some degree, but they do so much tighter to the rib cage because they originate on the hip, they run up all the way up to the thoracic spine, and they sort of come around the ribs, and so their fiber direction, instead of being more oriented side to side this way, are actually oriented more front to back. So if we look at skeleton here from the side, right, you can imagine sort of these lats wrapping close to the ribs, and so their fiber direction when they come up and attach to the arm is actually in this position parallel to the arm, meaning that they're going to be most effective at pulling the arm down and back when the arm is tight to the body, whether it's more of a pull down type motion or whether it's more of a row type motion. If the arm is tighter to the body, the lats are going to be more involved. Now, if you pick something in the middle of this, you know, say something 45 degrees or so, that's going to be a really, really good blend of both. Now, the other thing to consider with upper back versus lat training is this whole scapular motion thing and elevation, depression, and protraction, retraction, right? So big thing to remember about the lats is that they have a huge moment arm and a huge advantage to move the sternoclavicular joint, which is the junction essentially between the sternum and the clavicle. And so whenever the shoulder girdle is moving forward, the lats from this really forward, and I'll do this from the side, the lats from this really forward type position have a really good leverage to pull this backward to a point of about, you know, arm sort of in line with the torso. And when we're doing any sort of pull down type motion and the arm is more overhead, they have a really, really good advantage to do this type motion, which we call depression. Okay, so any kind of pull down and any kind of row thus will be really, really heavily influenced by whether or not there's more protraction, retraction versus elevation, depression. A lot of people falsely assume that if you have more scapular motion here, then these tissues get more work, which toward the sort of, you know, behind the body range they do, like in this retraction type thing. But in this protraction type thing, again, especially when my arm is more narrow to my body, the more that I reach forward, the more that lat, especially the more horizontal lats in this position, are going to pull the arm backward because of that advantage at the SC joint. So whether I'm doing a pull down or whether I'm doing a row, if I'm doing it for lats specifically, I want two main things. I want to prioritize motion of the clavicle and motion of the scapula, either front to back for the more horizontal running lats or more up to down for the more vertical facing lats. And I also want to prioritize a narrow arm path. If I'm instead, I'm trying to go for some upper back stuff, I'm going to keep a little bit wider of an arm path, whether that be somewhere in the middle here or even higher. And I'm going to prioritize a little bit of an arch in the spine, or a little bit of what we call extension, thoracic extension, where these ribs sort of come up in this way, right? And the reason that we do that is specifically to limit the scapular motion from coming too far forward and to make sure that the arm is the primary thing that's moving. And so we can get into what we call full retraction, which is where the scapula sort of comes up and inward, right? So if you sort of imagine doing a row and keeping your chest really high, your shoulder blades can come all the way back and all the way up, where, you know, again, all these muscles are doing a lot of work to get the scapula backward. And as a consequence of that, all these other things that are, again, scapular muscles and not necessarily spine, hip, and clavicle, you know, movers are going to do more of the work. Again, so the major summary is upper back. We want more of an extended posture, more of a wider arm path, and a little bit less, you know, involvement of a ton of this scapular motion this way and a ton of the scapular motion this way. And for lats, we want the opposite. We want a little bit more of a neutral spine, a spine where the back is a little bit more natural naturally rounded as the spine naturally is, and we want an arm path that is more narrow, and a clavicle and a shoulder blade that moves up and down, and that moves forward and backward. Now, it's important to remember that with the upper back stuff, it's not like you're limiting scapular motion, right? Not that you could really do that anyway if you were actually trying it in exercise, but just keep in mind that those primary motions are more going to be a lat type of thing, a lat dominated motion, especially not only because the things like the teres in the rear delts couldn't actually move this clavicle and this shoulder girdle directly, but also simply because we want to just make sure and allow for scapular mechanics to occur where they actually need to occur. We don't want to try to limit scapular motion and as a consequence run into some sort of orthopedic or structural issue, because again, we're trying to limit the thing that's supposed to move in the first place. So prioritize the orthopedic health over, you know, the specific kind of stimulus that you think that you're getting. Again, whether it be upper back or whether it be lats, at the end of the day, any kind of, you know, horizontal row will train some of this upper back stuff and some of this lat stuff, and any kind of pull down will train some of this lat stuff and some of this upper back stuff. But the bias in terms of how far in either direction you move will directly be determined by all the things we just talked about. Remember, arm path and shoulder girdle motion together.